The wedding photograph. Nobody really understood. Pull up the Newport wedding photo from September 1953 and look closely. 800 guests. Every last detail signed off by the groom's father. And the bride's own father isn't in the picture. He never made it down the aisle. Standing nearby is Rose Kennedy, a woman who once tried to leave her own marriage back in 1920, only to be sent home by her father. She spent years mailing relatives newspaper clippings with fashion mistakes circled in red ink. The letters she wrote to her new daughter-in-law started out cold, according to historians who've read them. And that young woman would eventually write a single sentence that undid 4 decades of Rose's careful work. It all started at a dinner party in Georgetown. Charles and Martha Bartlett threw it, and they'd been trying to get these two people in the same room for a while. He was a 34-year-old congressman from Massachusetts, nursing a bad back and a chronic illness. His family worked hard to keep out of the papers. She was 21, educated at Vassar and the Sorbonne, carrying a famous surname but almost no money of her own. The Bartletts thought it would be a nice match. What actually unfolded was far slower and far more calculated than the romantic version everyone tells today. He didn't phone her for months. She got engaged to someone else in the meantime. That detail rarely makes it into the anniversary specials, but it matters, because the marriage that would eventually produce America's most photographed First Lady didn't start as a love story. It started as an audition, Rose's 40-year apprenticeship. To understand what Jacqueline Bouvier was walking into, you first need to understand the life Rose Fitzgerald had already been living for decades. She wasn't some outside observer of the Kennedy machine. She helped build it, and she was also one of its first victims. Rose was the daughter of John Francis Fitzgerald, the singing mayor of Boston. She was sharp, socially gifted, and wanted badly to attend Wellesley. Her father sent her to a convent school instead. Most accounts say a Catholic mayor simply couldn't have a daughter enrolled at a Protestant college. She called it the biggest regret of her life, and said as much in her own memoir more than 60 years later. That's the essential thing to understand about Rose. She was told no early, she never forgot it, and she never made a scene about it in public. She married Joseph P. Kennedy in 1914 in a small private ceremony inside a cardinal's chapel. 9 children arrived over the following years. So did his affairs, open, frequent, and impossible to miss. Gloria Swanson, then the most famous actress in America, was a guest at the Kennedy home in Hyannisport during her involvement with Joe. Swanson wrote about the visits herself years later, in a memoir that obviously serves her own narrative, but the visits themselves are backed up by other sources. Rose greeted her warmly, poured the drinks, said nothing, except once. Around 1920, after 4 children in 6 years, she packed a bag and went home to her father's house in Dorchester. She lasted roughly 3 weeks. Her father, the same man who'd chosen her college for her, told her she'd made a promise and needed to honor it. So she went back and rebuilt herself into someone the family machine could actually use. She kept detailed index cards tracking her children's illnesses, vaccinations, weight, and dental visits, a household run like a small bureaucracy. She clipped newspaper photos of family members and circled anything that offended her sense of presentation, a cuff, a hemline, bad posture. She mailed those corrected clippings straight back to the people in them. Barbara Perry, who spent 5 years digging through the 250 boxes of Rose's papers released by the Kennedy Library in 2006, found this habit everywhere in the letters. And it makes sense once you see what Rose actually had control over. She had no say in her husband's finances, no say in his affairs, and, as would become devastatingly clear in 1941, when Joe arranged the lobotomy that left their daughter Rosemary permanently disabled, without, by most accounts, consulting Rose first. No say in her own children's medical decisions. What she did control was the image. The clothing, the church attendance, the etiquette, the photograph. She spent 4 decades perfecting the surface of a family she wasn't allowed to actually run. In 1951, the Vatican named her a papal countess, a fitting honor in its way for someone who'd built her entire identity around visible devotion. So when a 23-year-old with a French education and expensive taste showed up to marry the second son, Rose wasn't meeting a stranger. She was meeting her replacement, someone about to inherit a job Rose had worked without a single day off since 1914, and almost immediately, the corrections started arriving in the mail. Jackie's side of the trade. Jackie had her own reasons for saying yes, and none of them were romantic in the way the newsreels suggested. Her father, John Blackjack Bouvier, was a stockbroker whose money and reputation had both collapsed, largely thanks to his drinking. Her mother divorced him and remarried Hugh D. Auchincloss in 1942, which meant Jackie grew up shuttling between 2 of the most beautiful estates on the East Coast, Hammersmith Farm and Marywood, neither of which would ever belong to her. The Auchincloss fortune had Auchincloss heirs. Jackie and her sister Lee were stepchildren, surrounded by wealth they had no legal claim to. She was working as a photo interviewer for the Washington Times-Herald, making around $40 a week. She'd been engaged to a young stockbroker named John Husted and broke it off in early 1953, reportedly not long after her mother did the math on his salary out loud. Then Kennedy got serious. What each side was really after wasn't complicated. The Kennedys got a Catholic bride with a Newport pedigree, French fluency, and camera-ready composure. Exactly the polish Joe Kennedy had spent 30 years trying to buy and never quite managed to manufacture on his own. Jackie got an exit from a home where she had no real standing, plus a connection to a man who was funny, famous, and clearly headed somewhere. Both sides understood exactly what they were trading. Nobody involved seemed bothered by that. The warning signs weren't hidden either. Kennedy's reputation with women was common knowledge around Washington. In letters she wrote over 14 years to Father Joseph Leonard, an elderly priest in Dublin she'd befriended as a student. Letters that surfaced at auction in 2014 and remain unpublished, so we only have second-hand press accounts of their contents. She reportedly admitted fearing he'd be unfaithful before she'd even married him. She married him anyway. Even the timing of the engagement announcement tells you who was really steering things. The Saturday Evening Post had a profile in the works, built around the idea of the Senate's most eligible bachelor. Several biographers believe the engagement was deliberately held back until that story ran, so the family could squeeze one more news cycle out of his bachelor image before retiring it for good. That's not speculation about someone's private feelings. That's a business decision made by people who weren't the bride. A wedding that belonged to Joe Kennedy. The wedding on September 12, 1953 at St. Mary's in Newport wasn't really Jackie's day, and it wasn't Rose's either. It was Joseph P. Kennedy's product launch. Janet Auchincloss had wanted something understated and appropriately Newport. What she got was roughly 800 guests at the ceremony, hundreds more at the reception, an estimated 2,000 spectators pressing against police barricades outside the church, and a full national press corps. Senators, congressmen, photographers, all positioned exactly where the Kennedy office wanted them. Every meaningful decision needed the groom's father's sign-off. Anne Lowe designed the dress. A black couturier, who'd already made gowns for the Bouvier and Auchincloss women for years, including Janet's own wedding dress in 1942, she'd been commissioned to make 15 dresses for the wedding party. 10 days before the ceremony, a burst pipe flooded her studio and ruined most of them. She and her staff rebuilt everything from scratch, absorbing the cost themselves. When she arrived at Hammersmith Farm to deliver the finished gowns, she was told to use the service entrance because she was black. She refused and walked in the front door anyway. The New York Times covered the wedding extensively the next morning and never mentioned her name once. Jackie reportedly disliked the dress. Too much fabric, too much skirt, not her style at all. But she wore it because her mother insisted, and because 800 guests and every wire service in the country were already waiting. Meanwhile, her father sat in a hotel room a few miles away, uninvited to the rehearsal dinner, drinking. He never made it to the church. Hugh Auchincloss walked her down the aisle in his place. She got through the entire day without visibly cracking, a skill by that point she'd been quietly perfecting for about a decade. Look at that photograph again. Every single person in it is playing a part someone else assigned them. And the two women who would spend the next 20 years circling one another are both smiling for a camera set up by the same man. Moving into Rose's house. What's really interesting is what happened once Jackie moved into the world Rose had spent 40 years managing. Hyannisport wasn't really one house. It was 3 houses on 6 acres of oceanfront, with Joe firmly at the center of it all, and the whole setup made it obvious who answered to whom. Meals ran on Rose's schedule. Anyone who came down late for breakfast found the plates already cleared. Joe sat at the head of the table quizzing the children on current events and expecting sharp answers. Rose left notes everywhere. She switched off lights behind people. Despite living among enormous Wall Street wealth, she was famously frugal within her own household. Less about actual thrift, and more about being the one person allowed to enforce a rule under that roof. Into this walked a young woman who'd spent her adolescence being praised for staying quiet and composed. She simply didn't fit in, and didn't try particularly hard to. The Kennedy women played touch football on the lawn with real intensity. Jackie, who reportedly hurt her ankle in one of those early games, stopped playing altogether. She read books instead. She skipped the group activities. Friends later told biographers she had a private nickname for her sisters-in-law that reduced them to something like a cheer squad. She could apparently do impressions of all of them, for people she trusted. Take that detail with some caution since it comes secondhand. But the broader pattern shows up in the documented record too. As First Lady, she structured her calendar to spend as little time at the compound as the family would allow. Rose responded the way Rose always responded, with paper. Memos on protocol, memos on hemlines, notes on what was and wasn't appropriate for a senator's wife, and later a president's wife. Clippings kept arriving with circles drawn on them. Barbara Perry, working through Rose's own archived files, described the early letters between the two women as noticeably cold. And we know that because Rose herself kept and eventually donated every one of them. Jackie called her belle-mère, French for mother-in-law, which reads as either affectionate or as a very polished way of keeping distance. What she said in private was harsher. In her letters to Father Leonard, she reportedly wrote that she didn't find her mother-in-law especially intelligent, and that Rose would rather say a rosary than pick up a book. That line has circulated in press coverage since 2014. But since the letters were pulled before publication, treat it as well reported rather than fully confirmed. What we do know for certain is who she chose to write to. Not a friend. A priest. She wasn't gossiping. She was confessing. The marriage itself. In the fall of 1954, Kennedy underwent back surgery in New York that nearly killed him. He received last rites and went under the knife again the following February. He spent months recovering at his father's house in Palm Beach, and during that stretch, Jackie was constantly at his side, reading to him, managing his correspondence, gathering research for what became Profiles in Courage. Whatever the marriage was in 1955, that's what it looked like. A woman keeping a badly injured man company through the worst year of his life. The book won the Pulitzer Prize in 1957, after Joe Kennedy lobbied the committee aggressively behind the scenes. Ted Sorensen later admitted he'd written most of the first draft. Both facts are true simultaneously, which tells you a lot about how this family manufactured its achievements. Then came the summer of 1956, and the most brutally documented moment in this entire story. Kennedy lost the vice presidential nomination at the Chicago Convention in August and left almost immediately for a cruise around the Mediterranean with friends. His wife was 8 months pregnant. At Hammersmith Farm, she began hemorrhaging and was rushed into emergency surgery. The baby, a daughter, was stillborn. It was Bobby Kennedy who showed up at the hospital, Bobby who signed the paperwork and handled the burial. He was eventually reached and did return. Florida Senator George Smathers, a friend of his, later claimed he'd bluntly warned Kennedy he'd lose his marriage if he didn't get back, though Smathers was telling a story that flattered his own judgment years after the fact, so weigh it accordingly. What isn't in dispute is that Kennedy's absence lasted roughly 3 days after he'd been notified. Peter Lawford, who'd married into the family and later spoke extensively to biographers, said the topic was never raised with her directly, but that the general atmosphere made her feel she'd somehow failed at motherhood. Lawford was estranged from the family by the time he said this and had his own reasons for talking. Still, a miscarriage in 1955, a stillbirth in 1956, inside a family whose entire self-image rested on fertility and whose matriarch had delivered 9 children herself. By 1957, separation rumors were showing up in the papers. One story that's been repeated in book after book claims Joe Kennedy offered his daughter-in-law $1 million to stay married. It traces back to no actual document, no letter, no named eyewitness. It's pure atmosphere, worth mentioning only because its staying power says something. The family was so transparently transactional that a rumor about buying a wife's loyalty sounded believable to everyone who heard it. What's actually documented is that Joe Kennedy adored her and she adored him right back. One of the genuinely odd facts of this whole story. The same serial adulterer who'd humiliated Rose for 40 years became Jackie's ally inside the family. He listened to her. He took her side over his own daughters. She never had that kind of relationship with Rose. Caroline was born in November 1957, and the marriage found its footing. That part, at least, was real. Learning to control her own image. Then the machine started up again. The landslide re-election of 1958, then the presidential campaign, with Jackie pregnant for most of 1960. Watch what she did instead of hitting the campaign trail, because this is the moment she stops being just a supporting character. Unable to travel much, she wrote instead. A syndicated column called Campaign Wife ran under her byline. She answered voter mail, sat for television and print interviews, recorded spots in Spanish. She built her own public image and let it do the work while she stayed home. She'd been a photo interviewer herself. She knew exactly what reporters needed and exactly what they'd print. Rose had spent 40 years managing the family's image by circling other people's mistakes in red pen. Her daughter-in-law had learned something more valuable. John Jr. was born weeks after the election, premature, and the family moved into the White House with 2 young children and a wife recovering from a difficult delivery. Then she started buying herself distance. Within months, she'd leased Glen Ora, an estate near Middleburg, Virginia, and began spending long stretches there, away from Washington, away from the compound, away from the staff and the tourists and the Kennedys generally. When that lease ran out in 1963, she built her own house, Wexford, in the same stretch of Virginia hunt country. She designed it herself. Compare that to Rose, who lived in her husband's houses, on her husband's schedule, funded by her husband's money, for 50 straight years, without ever building anything of her own. The spending followed the same pattern. Mary Gallagher, Jackie's personal secretary, published a tell-all in 1969, without the family's approval, for the money, claiming the First Lady's personal spending in 1961 topped $100,000, more than the president's own salary. Gallagher had an obvious financial incentive to sensationalize. So treat the number skeptically. But Kennedy's own frustration over the bills is confirmed elsewhere, and the underlying pattern holds. Rose enforced thrift her entire life. Jackie spent freely, and nobody in the family ever managed to rein her in. In February 1962, she led a television crew through the White House restoration she'd overseen for a year. Roughly 56 million people watched. She won an honorary Emmy for it. In one broadcast, she'd turned the most decorative role in American public life into a genuine professional accomplishment, in front of the largest audience any Kennedy had ever reached. That December, at a formal Washington dinner honoring the family's work on intellectual disability, the seat of honor beside the president went to his mother. Rose spoke. Adlai Stevenson introduced her. There's a photograph of the president standing behind her, applauding, and by all accounts, Rose was thrilled. We know exactly how much it meant to her because the photo is preserved in her own personal papers. Jackie was in the room that night too, just seated somewhere else. The test no amount of money could fix. 8 months later, in August 1963, at a hospital on Cape Cod, Jackie delivered a son 5.5 weeks premature. Patrick Bouvier Kennedy lived 39 hours. He was rushed to Boston, and the president went with him. When it was over, Kennedy returned to the Cape, and according to people close to them, held his wife in a way witnesses described as completely unlike him. Aide Dave Powers said he'd never seen the president behave that way, though Powers was a devoted loyalist whose accounts always leaned generous. So take that with some perspective. Still, something genuinely shifted that autumn. Friends noticed the two of them holding hands in public at Newport, something that simply hadn't been part of their relationship before. It's the closest this marriage ever came to real repair. It lasted about 10 weeks. That October, she left the country. She traveled to meet Aristotle Onassis, a Greek shipping magnate whose business dealings the Kennedy administration had actually prosecuted, and whose reputation, Siyasanan,